Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. For the benefit of those that are just now becoming interested in this tragic case, I wanted to give just a little bit of a background. On November 13th, 2022, law enforcement officials arrived at a location in Moscow, Idaho that was just steps away from the University of Idaho campus in Moscow. 1122 King Road was at that time and had been a rental property for students who wanted to reside off campus and be close enough to campus as this property was. That day, we are told that 4 students were found brutally unalived. Madison Mogan, age 21, Kaylee Goncalves, age 21, Xana Kernodle, age 20, and Ethan Chapin, age 20. And everything that we do here at the Indie Zone is to consider the facts of the case and to remember always the lives that were lost, the holes that have been forever left in the hearts of the families and the friends of Kaylee and Maddie and Xana and Ethan. Approximately 6½ weeks after November 13th, 2022, news broke of an arrest across the country in Pennsylvania of Bryan C. Kohberger, who was then 28 years of age, who was visiting with his family over the December-January holiday break from Washington State University, where he had just completed his first semester as a PhD graduate student candidate, criminology, and was also working there as a teaching assistant. And the campus where he studied, where he lived, is located in Pullman, Washington, approximately 10 miles away from Moscow, Idaho. Mr. Kohberger is at all times considered innocent under the eyes of the law, until or unless he either pleads guilty to the 5 first-degree felonies that he is charged with, or the future jury that will adjudicate him and consider the state of Idaho's case in chief, if they return a verdict of guilty. Until or unless that happens, he is considered and presumed innocent under the eyes of the law. This case, then, for the most part, had its origins in Pennsylvania, because that's where the arrest was effectuated. Mr. Kohberger was arrested in the early morning hours of December 30th, 2022 in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He was booked into the Monroe County jail there in Pennsylvania, where he remained for approximately 1 week. We're going to look at the process of extradition that happened, because what occurred in Pennsylvania has been back front and center of the case ever since the defense filed motions to suppress evidence relative to searches and seizures that occurred in Pennsylvania. And those filings were submitted in November. Judge Stephen J. Hippler entertained 14 motions to suppress evidence, including several that dealt with what happened in Pennsylvania. There were oral arguments on the 23rd and 24th of January, where the respective sides argued their positions to the court, and all that's left right now are the rulings. But let's go back to those early days of the case in Pennsylvania. After Mr. Kohberger's arrest, a proceeding called extradition then was effectuated, because although we learned recently that the same officer from the Moscow Police Department who wrote and signed the affidavit of probable cause that led directly to the warrant being issued for Mr. Kohberger's arrest in Idaho We learned he was in Pennsylvania, but he could not, Detective Brett Payne is who I'm speaking of, arrest Mr. Kohberger because this was a foreign jurisdiction. He was not a licensed officer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, although he was back in Idaho. So then what needed to happen is this extradition proceeding, which began almost immediately. And then, after a couple of appearances in the Court of Common Pleas of Monroe County in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in case number 682 MD 2022, the extradition order was signed by the same judge who signed the warrant for Mr. Kohberger's arrest in Pennsylvania. He was arrested in Pennsylvania for nothing that he did wrong in Pennsylvania. It was because there were 5 criminal counts against him back in Idaho. This extradition order states as follows. And now on this 3rd day of January 2023, after hearing and Bryan Kohberger's voluntary waiver of his rights pertaining to extradition, it is hereby ordered that the defendant Bryan Kohberger, in the custody of the Sheriff of Monroe County, Pennsylvania, he by him surrendered to the Latah County District Attorney's Office, State of Idaho, or its authorized representatives within 10 calendar days of this date. What does this first paragraph mean? Well, it's telling us that as of the 3rd of January 2023, there had been a hearing that day in open court. Mr. Kohberger voluntarily waived all of his rights, and he had rights that allowed him to fight extradition and to remain in Pennsylvania until the extradition proceeding, which is the legal process of returning a person physically from one jurisdiction to the next. He could have fought it. He didn't. In open court, he waived his rights, and the court found that this waiver was voluntary and knowing. And so what the court found is that while Mr. Kohberger was presently in the custody of the officials in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, that he should be surrendered to the officials across the country in Latah County within 10 calendar days of the date of this order, which was the 3rd of January 2023. The next paragraph says, it is further ordered that the defendant, having signed in our presence, so he signed this in open court, a writing which states that he consents, in other words, he's not fighting this, but he consents to returning to the demanding state of Idaho. Said writing shall be forwarded by the clerk of courts to the office of the governor of the Commonwealth. It's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It ends by saying the Sheriff of Monroe County, Pennsylvania, is ordered to deliver a copy of the defendant's signed written consent to the duly accredited agents of the demanding state of Idaho. And this is signed by Margarita Patty Worthington, and she again is the judge who presided over these extradition proceedings and also signed the warrant for Mr. Kohberger's arrest in Pennsylvania. There is a complete file that is opened in Pennsylvania, and certain records are available for you to read for free on the internet if you go to this location, this web address that I'm providing you here. Let's go to page 2 of this packet. Waiver of extradition, in re Bryan Kohberger. And it states, I hereby certify that I, Bryan Kohberger, of my own free will, do voluntarily agree to return to the state of Idaho as a prisoner from the county of Monroe, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and for the purpose of answering the charges. So he's voluntarily stating here that he understands he's a prisoner in Monroe County. He's going to willingly go back to Idaho to face these charges. Furthermore, I hereby waive any formality, and I am willing to return to the state of Idaho without the governor's requisition or other papers necessary in such cases which would ordinarily involve the governor where a party is fighting extradition. And do exonerate the county of Monroe from any blame, compulsion, or interference of this connection. So he's waiving that the officials in Monroe County did anything wrong here. He's doing this freely and willingly. Signed, Bryan Kohberger. Continues, in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, January 3rd, 2023. I certify that the above was read to me and signed by me, and this agreement has been without compulsion, threat, or force on the part of authorities here and upon the free desire of Bryan Kohberger. So we see his second signature on this page, and there's 2 witnesses that signed. So this is what allowed the officials in Pennsylvania to return Mr. Kohberger. He could have fought extradition. It would have taken at least many, many weeks, possibly months, to forcibly return him to Idaho. He didn't fight it. He went back, and as it turned out, it was the next day that he was flown back to Idaho and turned over to the officials there by the Pennsylvania State Police in the Pennsylvania State Police's own airplane. He went across the country. This will now conclude this episode of the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. Thank you as always for joining us here today.